The medical bay aboard the Kethari research vessel was in chaos. Monitors pulsed erratically, alarms blared, and a team of alien doctors hovered around the operating table, their elongated fingers flicking through holographic displays. The patient, a high-ranking Kethari diplomat, lay motionless, his bioluminescent skin flickering weakly. Dr. Vale, the lead surgeon, let out a sharp exhale through his spherical slits. "This makes no sense," he muttered, adjusting the diagnostic scanner. "The circulatory stabilization should have taken effect hours ago." "We have corrected the enzyme ratios 3 times," another doctor interjected. "If we alter them again, we risk total organ collapse." A frustrated murmur ran through the team. They had done everything according to Kethari medical doctrine. Every variable was accounted for, but the diplomat's condition only worsened. The doors hissed open, and a human in a navy blue uniform stepped inside. His name tag read Ryan, and he carried a well-worn medical kit slung over his shoulder. He scanned the scene with narrowed eyes, taking in the frantic movements of the Kethari physicians. "What's the situation?" Ryan asked, dropping his bag onto a nearby counter. Dr. Vale barely spared him a glance. "Irrelevant. You lack the anatomical knowledge to contribute." Ryan crossed his arms. "I was told you needed all available medics." "We require specialists," Dr. Vale snapped, his usually smooth voice fracturing under strain. "Not," he gestured vaguely at Ryan, "whatever human methodology you employ." Ryan ignored the jab and moved closer to the patient. The Kethari's bioluminescence was fading, a bad sign. He glanced at the monitors, recognizing enough of the readings to tell that something was blocking circulation. "You sure this is a metabolic issue?" Ryan asked. Dr. Vale's frills darkened in irritation. "Of course. The enzyme imbalance is obstructing oxygen transport." Ryan frowned. "Or it's clotting." "Impossible. Kethari do not experience clotting failures." Ryan rolled his shoulders. "Humor me. What happens if their blood thickens beyond normal viscosity?" The team exchanged glances. "That would be fatal," one murmured. Ryan sighed. "Then I need to see a cross-section of his blood under magnification." Dr. Vale hesitated, then gestured for a tech to comply. A sample was extracted, analyzed, and projected onto a screen. Ryan leaned in. "There. Those structures, those aren't enzyme disruptions. That's coagulation." Dr. Vale's frills twitched. "That should not be possible." "Well, it is," Ryan said. "And if we don't break it up fast, he's going to crash." Dr. Vale's mandibles clicked in frustration. "We have no protocol for this." Ryan's hands were already in his bag. "I do." Dr. Vale's frills flared. "You cannot administer untested human treatments." "Then watch your patient die," Ryan shot back. "Or trust that I actually know what I'm doing." The room fell silent. The diplomat's bioluminescence flickered again, weaker than before. Dr. Vale clenched his fingers. "What do you need?" Ryan pulled out a vial. "An anticoagulant. It's designed for human blood, but clotting is clotting, and right now, he's suffocating from the inside out." The Kethari hesitated, then gave a sharp nod. "Do it." Ryan prepped the injection. He moved quickly, finding a suitable vein and administering the dose. The monitors spiked as the diplomat's body reacted. The team held their breath. For the first time in hours, the readings started to stabilize. The tension in the medical bay didn't dissolve immediately. The monitors showed improvement, but the Kethari physicians remained stiff, their elongated fingers twitching as they analyzed the data. Ryan stepped back, rubbing a hand over his face, exhaustion catching up with him. He had expected skepticism, but the sheer rigidity of their approach was something else entirely. Dr. Vale's frills trembled slightly, his gaze locked on the stabilizing readings. The other physicians whispered among themselves, their subtle bioluminescent pulses betraying unease. One of them adjusted a display, confirming the patient's vitals were strengthening. Dr. Vale finally turned to Ryan, his mandibles flexing before he spoke. His voice lacked the condescension it held earlier. "The clot is dissolving." Ryan exhaled, his muscles unclenching. "Good. But we're not done. He's going to need monitoring to make sure there's no secondary reaction. I don't know how Kethari systems metabolize this anticoagulant, so we'll have to watch for rebound effects. Another doctor tilted her head, her frills rippling in a slow, deliberate pattern. You administered a foreign compound into a high-ranking diplomat with no prior testing. Ryan met her gaze, tired but firm. I took an educated risk. It worked. Dr. Vale's fingers twitched. And if it hadn't? Ryan shrugged, the weight of the situation pressing on him. Then we'd be having a very different conversation right now. Silence stretched. The Kethari weren't accustomed to this kind of thinking. Ryan could see it in the way they exchanged looks, processing what had just happened. They were meticulous planners, every medical procedure carefully designed with no room for improvisation. The idea of making a decision under pressure, without exhaustive research, was clearly unsettling to them. One of the younger physicians finally spoke. You acted without certainty. Ryan huffed a quiet laugh. Welcome to human medicine. Dr. Vale's mandibles tightened, but he didn't argue. He turned back to the patient, his fingers gliding over a console. We will observe him closely. Ryan nodded. Good. Keep an eye on circulation markers. If anything shifts, let me know immediately. The other physicians hesitated, then nodded as well. Ryan leaned against the counter, rolling his shoulders. The adrenaline was fading, leaving behind the familiar exhaustion that came after a high-stakes emergency. He watched as the Kethari doctors resumed their work, their movements more controlled now, less frantic. They weren't ignoring him anymore. Dr. Vale glanced at him, his expression unreadable. You should rest. We will monitor the situation. Ryan considered arguing, but fatigue won out. He gave a short nod and turned to leave. As he exited, he caught snippets of hushed conversations, words like reckless, effective, and impossible. He had a feeling this wasn't the last time he'd be called into the medical bay. Ryan's quarters aboard the Kethari vessel were modest, just a sleeping platform, a small work desk, and a storage compartment for his gear. He dropped onto the platform, exhaling as the tension in his shoulders finally eased. His mind replayed the last few hours, the controlled panic in the medical bay, the way the Kethari had hesitated before letting him act. He understood their caution, even respected it to a degree, but it was clear they weren't used to making high-stakes decisions without absolute certainty. He barely had time to close his eyes before his communicator chimed. He groaned, rolling over to grab it. Ryan came Dr. Vale's voice, clipped and precise. The patient is stable, but there are new variables we must discuss. Ryan sat up, rubbing a hand over his face. On my way. The medical bay was noticeably quieter than before. The frantic energy had faded, but the tension lingered. The Kethari physicians stood in clusters, murmuring among themselves. Dr. Vale stood near the patient's bed, his posture rigid. Ryan approached, glancing at the monitors. The diplomat's bioluminescence had returned to a steady glow, but his circulatory markers showed slight fluctuations. Nothing immediately dangerous, but enough to warrant concern. Dr. Vale gestured to the readings. The anticoagulant is still active, but its effects are not dissipating as expected. Ryan frowned. Metabolism issue. We cannot be certain. Dr. Vale's mandibles twitched. Kethari physiology does not typically retain foreign compounds in this manner. Ryan considered the problem. Human medication was tailored for human biology. The Kethari system might not be breaking it down efficiently, which meant it could linger longer than intended. Any signs of excessive bleeding? Ryan asked. No, another physician answered, but clotting factors remain suppressed. That wasn't ideal. If the anticoagulant didn't clear properly, the diplomat could develop secondary complications. Ryan tapped his fingers against his arm, thinking. We might need to introduce a counteragent, he said. Dr. Vale's frills rippled in what Ryan was beginning to recognize as unease. You propose another untested intervention. Ryan exhaled through his nose. Not untested, just untested on Kethari. But Dr. Vale's gaze sharpened. That distinction is not reassuring. Ryan crossed his arms. What's the alternative? Wait and hope his system clears it naturally. The Kethari exchanged glances. Ryan sighed. Look, if this were a human patient, I'd administer a reversal agent, something to help the body restore normal clotting function. The problem is, I don't know how your system will react to it. Dr. Vale's fingers flexed as he considered. What are the risks? Ryan hesitated. Worst case? It overcorrects, and we end up with renewed clotting issues. Dr. Vale's frills darkened. Unacceptable. Then we monitor closely, Ryan said. Administer a small dose, track the response, and adjust accordingly. The room settled into silence again. Ryan could see the internal debate playing out in their expressions. Finally, Dr. Vale gave a sharp nod. Proceed. Ryan retrieved the necessary vial from his kit. He measured out the smallest viable dose before administering it. Then they waited. The monitors remained steady at first. Then, after several minutes, the clotting markers began shifting toward normal parameters. Dr. Vale's fingers twitched as he watched. It is working. Ryan exhaled, tension easing. Good, we'll keep monitoring, but this should balance things out. Dr. Vale's gaze lingered on the human medic. This approach adjusting in real time, this is common in human medical practice. Ryan met his eyes. When necessary, yeah. Dr. Vale's frills pulsed faintly. I see. The other Kethari physicians murmured among themselves again, exchanging quiet observations. Ryan rolled his shoulders. If anything changes, I'll be on call. Dr. Vale inclined his head slightly in acknowledgement. As Ryan left the medical bay, he had the distinct feeling that this encounter had shifted something not just in their patient, but in the way the Kethari viewed him. Ryan hadn't even reached his quarters before his communicator buzzed again. He sighed, debating ignoring it for a full 2 seconds before answering. Dr. Vale's voice came through, clipped but lacking its usual rigidity. The diplomat is regaining consciousness. Ryan pivoted immediately, retracing his steps back toward the medical bay. The fact that the patient was waking up was good, but the way Vale had phrased it suggested there was more to the situation. The atmosphere in the bay had shifted since he left. The hushed murmurs from before had been replaced with a controlled, almost studious quiet. The medical staff stood at attention near the patient's bedside, observing him closely. The diplomat's bioluminescence had strengthened, but his movements were sluggish, his gaze unfocused. Ryan stepped up to the bedside, scanning the monitors out of habit. Nothing alarming stood out, but the diplomat's expression was tight, his fingers twitching slightly against the sheet. Vale gestured toward the patient. He is experiencing discomfort. Ryan studied the diplomat's face. Pain or disorientation. The diplomat's mandibles flexed, his frills twitching erratically. His bioluminescent skin pulsed unevenly, and his breath came in shallow bursts. Ryan had seen enough post-op recoveries to recognize the signs. He's in distress, Ryan said. Could be lingering effects from the clotting event, or the anticoagulant's interaction with his nervous system. Vale's frills darkened. We have administered standard post-procedural stabilizers. Ryan didn't respond immediately. If those had worked, Vale wouldn't have called him back. He crouched slightly, bringing himself level with the patient's gaze. The diplomat's eyes tracked him sluggishly but didn't fully focus. Sir Ryan said evenly, "Can you understand me?" The diplomat's mandibles parted slightly, but his response was delayed. Strange. Sensation. Ryan glanced at Vale. Define strange. The diplomat's fingers curled against the sheet. Body is sluggish, heavy. Ryan's mind raced through possibilities. Could be lingering clot remnants, residual effects from the anticoagulant, or even something unrelated that had been masked until now. He turned to Vale. Did you scan for neurological disruptions? We detected no abnormalities, Vale said, but there was a hesitation in his tone. Ryan exhaled, then straightened. I need to check something. He moved to a nearby console, pulling up the diplomat's metabolic panel. He scrolled through the readings, searching for anything out of range. Then he saw it. Ryan cursed under his breath. Vale stiffened. Explain. Ryan gestured to the fluctuating markers. His electrolyte balance is off. He's experiencing mild systemic depletion. Vale's frills twitched. That should not be possible. We have been regulating his fluid composition. Ryan pointed at the data. Not well enough. The anticoagulant likely influenced ion exchange rates in his cells, his body struggling to recalibrate. Another physician spoke up, her tone uncertain. This was not an anticipated outcome. Ryan resisted the urge to say, "No kidding." Instead, he focused on solutions. We need to supplement his system, adjust electrolyte concentrations and monitor his response. Vale's mandibles flexed. "You are certain?" Ryan gave him a flat look. "As certain as you were about the enzyme imbalance." Vale's frills flared slightly, but he didn't argue. Instead, he turned to his team and issued a sharp command. A moment later, an IV line was adjusted, and the necessary compounds were introduced into the Diplomat system. They waited. The Diplomat's tense muscles gradually relaxed. His breathing steadied, and his bioluminescent glow evened out. His fingers, which had been curled into the sheets, unfurled slightly. Ryan exhaled. That should keep him stable while his body rebalances. Vale studied the Diplomat, then Ryan. "Your approach." He hesitated, as if choosing his words carefully. "It lacks refinement, but it has yielded results." Ryan huffed a quiet laugh. "I'll take that as a compliment." The other physicians murmured among themselves. Ryan could feel the weight of their scrutiny, the way they were reassessing him in real time. The Diplomat's eyes finally focused fully on him. "You are the human." Ryan nodded. "That's me." The Diplomat's gaze lingered. "You acted outside protocol." Ryan shrugged. "You'd be dead otherwise." A pause. Then, the Diplomat gave the smallest inclination of his head. Not quite gratitude, but something close. Vale observed the exchange before speaking again. "We will continue monitoring his condition, should further complications arise." Ryan smirked. Yeah, you'll call me." Vale didn't confirm it aloud, but the slight shift in his posture told Ryan everything he needed to know. Ryan had barely stepped out of the medical bay when he felt the weight of dozens of Kethari eyes on him. The corridors were quieter than usual, but the few Kethari present were watching him with an intensity that made his skin itch. Some whispered in hushed tones, their frills pulsing in unreadable patterns. Others simply stared, as if trying to reconcile the human who had just rewritten their understanding of emergency medicine. He ignored it as best he could, making his way toward the observation deck. He needed a moment to clear his head. The bay's transparent walls gave a perfect view of the stars, stretching endlessly in every direction. He leaned against the railing, letting out a deep breath. Footsteps approached behind him. He didn't turn. Dr. Vale stopped beside him, hands clasped behind his back. He was silent for a long moment, watching the stars like Ryan was. When he finally spoke, his voice lacked its earlier sharpness. "The Diplomat's condition continues to improve. His metabolic markers are approaching normal ranges." Ryan nodded. "Good." Vale shifted slightly. "The medical council has reviewed today's events." Ryan glanced at him. "And they do not know what to make of you." Ryan huffed, shaking his head. "Not surprised." Vale's frills twitched. "Your methods are disordered, reckless." Ryan turned to face him. "And effective." Vale exhaled through his spiracles. "Yes, effective." He hesitated, then continued. "Our medical doctrine is built upon certainty. We do not act unless we are sure." Ryan studied him. "And if there's no time for certainty?" Vale's mandibles flexed. "Until today, that was never a consideration." There it was. The real reason Vale had sought him out. Ryan had forced them to confront something they had never accounted for: the necessity of adaptation under pressure. Ryan folded his arms. "Look, I get it. You've spent centuries refining your methods. But medicine isn't just about getting things right, it's about making the best call when everything is going wrong." Vale was quiet for a long moment. Then, finally, he said, I do not understand how you accept such uncertainty. Ryan sighed. Because we have to. Humans don't always get the luxury of certainty. He tapped the railing. But we survive. We learn. And sometimes we have to make the call before it's too late. Vale considered him, his gaze unreadable. Then, in a rare gesture, he inclined his head slightly. A silent acknowledgement. Ryan arched a brow. Was that a thank you? Vale straightened. Do not overinterpret it. Ryan grinned. Too late. Vale turned to leave, but before he did, he said, the medical council wishes to discuss further collaboration. They believe there is value in understanding human emergency response methodology. Ryan blinked, caught slightly off guard. Wait, you want me to teach you? Vale's frills pulsed faintly. We wish to study your approach. Whether we adopt it remains to be seen. Ryan smirked. I'll take it. Vale didn't respond, simply walking away. Ryan turned back to the stars, letting the moment settle in. He had come aboard this ship as an outsider, a human medic among a species that saw his methods as crude and unpredictable. But now they were asking to learn. He chuckled to himself, shaking his head. Maybe humans weren't so reckless after all.